The glass towers of downtown Toronto gleamed like cold mirrors against the night sky. From her corner office at the top of NorthStar Innovations, Emily Carter pressed her fingertips against the window pane and stared down at the city below. The lights of Bay Street reflected her own restless gaze, sharp, ambitious, and restless. She had only been CEO for 6 months, and already whispers circled the boardroom like vultures. The whispers were about a janitor. His name was David Ross, 44 years old. A quiet man with tired eyes and a perpetual air of invisibility. He'd been with NorthStar for nearly 4 years, working the night shifts no one wanted, pushing his cleaning cart silently through the polished hallways. After executives had long gone home, to most, he was just another uniform, someone who made the fingerprints on glass walls disappear before morning. But lately, security footage suggested something else, something troubling. Ross has been accessing restricted areas, the CFO had murmured, sliding a file across Emily's desk one morning. Server rooms, executive offices, even the R&D wing. Emily frowned, remembering the grainy clips she'd already reviewed. David, moving with careful purpose through hallways he wasn't authorized to enter. David, lingering at a senior engineer's workstation, his calloused hands resting near ports where, unmistakably, a small device glimmered before disappearing into his pocket. Industrial espionage? Emily had asked. The CFO only shrugged, but the implication was clear. Now, standing alone with Toronto's skyline glittering like a field of broken glass, Emily replayed the footage in her mind. In 3 weeks, NorthStar would unveil a revolutionary piece of medical technology, an eye-driven monitoring system that could predict cardiac failure hours before it happened. Competitors were circling like sharks. If that technology leaked, the consequences would be catastrophic. Her jaw tightened. Not on my watch. David Ross, meanwhile, had no idea that suspicion shadowed his every step. To his colleagues on the cleaning staff, he was steady and selfless, the man who swapped shifts without complaint, who slipped birthday cards written in neat handwriting into lockers, who quietly carried the heaviest loads without ever asking for thanks. But to executives, he was invisible. Emily Carter was not the kind of woman to ignore patterns. At 36, she had carved her path to the top with razor-sharp strategies and an iron sense of discipline. She had weathered a bitter divorce that left her raising her 10-year-old son, Lucas, alone. Numbers, reports, and market data had become her armor. People were unpredictable, messy, prone to betrayals she no longer had the energy to endure. But as she studied David's thin file, no degree, patchwork employment history, single father raising a 9-year-old daughter named Sophie something, gnawed at her instincts. Why would a janitor risk everything for corporate secrets? And why now? That Thursday night, she stayed later than usual, at 11:43 p.m. Just as the footage had shown before, David swiped into the server room. Emily watched from a darkened office down the hall as he disappeared behind the heavy door. 40 minutes later, he emerged carrying a sealed container. He slipped it into his battered backpack and left without a glance over his shoulder. Her heart thudded in her chest. Was that NorthStar property? A stolen prototype? She could have called security then and there. But something in his steady gait, something almost resigned, made her hesitate. Not yet. She whispered to herself, I need to see this with my own eyes. The next evening, Emily traded her tailored suit for jeans and a dark hoodie kept in her gym bag. By the time David's shift ended, she was parked inconspicuously in the underground garage, watching his aging Honda Civic pull out. The pursuit felt surreal. She, a CEO worth millions on paper, following a janitor through the arteries of Toronto's late-night traffic. He drove east, away from the glass towers and high-rise condos, away from the neighborhoods where executives lived behind manicured hedges. Street by street, the lights dimmed, the sidewalks grew rougher, until they reached the outskirts of Scarborough. Emily's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed that this was the handoff, that he would meet some shadowy figure, pass along a USB stick, sell her company's future for quick cash. But instead, David pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of a weather-worn building. The sign above the door was faded, its letters half-peeled but still legible. Scarborough Community Resource Center. Emily blinked. A community center. David got out, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and disappeared inside. For a long moment, she sat frozen, torn between relief and confusion. Finally, curiosity outweighed caution. She stepped out of her car and followed, her pulse hammering in her ears. Through a narrow window, Emily caught her first glimpse inside. Fluorescent lights buzzed over a makeshift classroom. Folding tables, second-hand chairs, a battered whiteboard. At the front, a dozen teenagers crowded around laptops, some so old their screens flickered faintly. And there was David, not hunched, not invisible, but standing tall at the whiteboard, marker in hand. His voice carried with unexpected authority. "Remember what we said about algorithms? Efficiency matters. Let's test it with a real problem tonight." The kids, immigrant children, indigenous youth. A mix of faces and accents watched him with rapt attention. Emily's breath caught as he sketched out a flowchart that, to her practiced eye, looked like advanced systems architecture. The same man who mopped conference room floors by day was teaching college-level computer science by night. One girl raised her hand. "Mr. Ross, could this work for the resource database we were talking about?" He smiled warmly. "Excellent idea, Aisha. That's exactly the kind of application we're aiming for." Emily's stomach dropped. The resource database. That was the kind of pilot program NorthStar's own developers had only theorized about. She gripped the doorframe, her world tilting. The janitor she suspected of espionage wasn't stealing technology. He was building it, teaching it right here in the forgotten corners of her city. For the first time in years, Emily Carter felt something unfamiliar cut through her cold corporate certainty, doubt, and behind that, something even more dangerous, respect. Emily Carter had spent her entire career relying on numbers, projections, and market forecasts. But nothing in a spreadsheet could have prepared her for what she'd just witnessed inside that rundown community center in Scarborough. Her mind reeled as she crouched behind the window frame. Just hours earlier, she had been prepared to order the janitor's quiet termination for corporate espionage. Now, that same man was explaining recursion and algorithm optimization to a group of wide-eyed teenagers, his hands flying across a whiteboard like a conductor leading an orchestra. And the laptops. She had assumed he'd been sneaking equipment out of NorthStar for profit. But as she watched him hand refurbished devices to children, whose clothes bore the stains of long use, she realized those stolen containers had been full of hope, not secrets. Her heart was still racing as she slipped back into the shadows and returned to her car. But she couldn't leave, not yet. She wanted answers. The following night, Emily doubled down. She waited in her office until nearly midnight, then crept down the fire stairs as the building emptied. The custodial team dispersed one by one, until only David remained, pushing his cart down the executive hallway, humming softly to himself. Emily's pulse quickened when she saw him stop at a workstation belonging to one of her senior engineers. His eyes flicked up and down the hall. Then he slid a USB stick into the computer. For a moment the screen glowed, reflecting in his steady gaze. He typed something quickly, withdrew the device, and slipped it into his pocket. Emily bit her lip, hard enough to taste iron. Was this the proof she needed? Espionage, clear as day. And yet, the memory of him smiling at those kids gnawed at her certainty. She whispered under her breath, "What the hell are you doing, David Ross?" At 10:15 p.m., David wheeled his cart into the custodial closet, hung his uniform neatly on a hook, and reemerged in jeans and a worn leather jacket. Emily was already in the garage, her black SUV hidden in the corner. She ducked low as his Honda Civic coughed to life and rolled up the ramp into the Toronto night. The chase was on. Downtown glittered like a constellation as she tailed him north, keeping 3 cars between them. His taillights bobbed through traffic along Yonge Street before veering east. Soon the polished storefronts and gleaming condominiums faded into older brick buildings, tagged with graffiti, corner stores with flickering neon signs, bus stops where exhausted workers huddled against the cold. Emily adjusted her hoodie, hands slick with sweat despite the chill. Every block they drove farther from Bay Street felt like descending into another world. A world David belonged to, and one she had never touched. Was he headed to another drop point? Another late-night meeting with a buyer? She kept her eyes locked on his car as it turned into a side street lined with shuttered shops. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw a dark SUV pull away from the curb ahead of him. Her chest tightened. Was he being followed too? Or had she let paranoia twist shadows into threats? Finally, David pulled into the same cracked lot she recognized from the night before the Scarborough Community Resource Center. Emily parked across the street, killing her headlights through the dusty windows. She saw him again unloading his containers, each marked with NorthStar's faded asset tags. This time, she didn't hesitate. She crept across the street, heart pounding, and pressed herself against the wall beneath the glowing exit sign. She peered inside. Tonight's class was larger, not just teenagers, but parents to newcomers with accents thick as molasses, indigenous elders with wary eyes, even a mother bouncing a toddler on her knee. David stood at the front, sleeves rolled up, a laptop balanced on the table. His voice carried through the cracked window. Technology isn't just for corporations. It's for communities. If we wait for permission, for funding, for someone in a tower downtown to hand it down, we'll wait forever. So we build it ourselves, together. The room erupted in nods and murmurs of agreement. Emily's breath hitched. She had spent her career convincing shareholders that NorthStar's technology could change lives. Yet here was a man proving it. Night after night, with no budget, no marketing campaign, just grit and heart. A commotion suddenly broke her thoughts. The front door burst open and two older teens stormed in, their hoodies pulled tight, voices sharp with frustration. "Ross, we heard you're giving away laptops." One of them sneered. "Where's ours?" The room froze. Some of the younger kids shrank back in their seats. Emily tensed. Was this it? The moment the situation spiraled out of control. But David remained calm. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, his voice steady. "This isn't a giveaway," he said firmly. "It's a commitment. You show up, you learn, you contribute, then you earn your tools." One of the teens scoffed, but the other hesitated, eyes flickering with something softer, shame, maybe, or longing. Finally, with a muttered curse, they backed out of the room, leaving only the echo of their footsteps. David exhaled slowly and turned back to the class with a reassuring smile. Emily's hands trembled where she pressed them to the cold wall. That moment of tension had revealed more than his lessons ever could. David Ross wasn't just teaching code. He was teaching resilience, discipline, and dignity. And he had done it under her nose for years, invisible in her spotless hallways. As the class wound down, Emily slipped back into the night. She sat in her car for nearly an hour, engine off, watching the last of the families drift into the dark streets, clutching laptops like lifelines. At midnight, David emerged again, shoulders heavy but face lit with quiet pride. He loaded his empty containers into the Civic and drove away. Emily didn't follow this time. Instead, she stayed parked in that crumbling lot, staring at the faded sign above the door, Scarborough Community Resource Center. For the first time since she'd taken the CEO chair, Emily Carter felt her certainty falter. She didn't know if David Ross was a thief, a hero, or something in between. But one thing was undeniable. He was hiding a secret, and tomorrow she would uncover it. Emily Carter had lived her life by certainties. A business plan projected 3 quarters out, a cost analysis that anticipated every variable, a personal calendar mapped to the minute. But after 2 nights of shadowing David Ross, certainty had become a stranger. The janitor she suspected of espionage was teaching, not in some ivy-covered lecture hall or sleek downtown classroom, but in a scarred community center with flickering lights and duct-taped furniture. And the students, they weren't MBA candidates or engineers in training. They were children, teenagers from immigrant families, indigenous kids from housing projects, parents who'd worked double shifts before sitting down at battered keyboards. Emily couldn't reconcile it. Why would a man with access to every secret inside NorthStar risk sneaking hardware out of her company only to pour it into this forgotten corner of Toronto? She needed answers. The following Friday, she canceled her dinner with a Bay Street investor and parked once more outside the Scarborough Community Resource Center. Her pulse quickened when she spotted David's Civic, its muffler rattling as It settled into its usual space. This time, she didn't linger outside. She wanted to see more. Emily pulled her hood low and slipped through the front doors, blending into a small crowd of families shuffling inside. The smell hit her first: dust, cleaning solution, and the faint warmth of home-cooked food drifting. From a back room, she slid down a hallway, pausing just beyond the classroom's open door. What she saw made her chest tighten. David stood at the whiteboard again, marker in hand. But he wasn't mopping or polishing glass. He was alive, animated, explaining loops and conditional statements with the confidence of a professor. His words carried, measured yet enthusiastic. Remember what we said about efficiency? Every program is a conversation between human intent and machine logic. If we write clearly, the system responds clearly. If we're sloppy, it stumbles. Just like life. The students laughed softly. He grinned. Emily's hand gripped the doorframe. She had heard a dozen engineers at NorthStar try to make coding accessible to outsiders. None had succeeded like this. A girl in a second-hand hoodie raised her hand. "Mr. Ross, could this method work for the food bank inventory system, so we don't lose track when deliveries come late?" David's eyes lit. "That's an excellent idea, Sarah. In fact, let's make that our project tonight." He turned, sketching boxes and arrows across the board, outlining a rudimentary database design. Within minutes, the kids were typing furiously, collaborating, testing, laughing when errors popped up, cheering when code ran successfully. Emily's breath caught. These weren't just lessons. They were solutions, practical systems that could strengthen their own community. And David guided it all with a patience that made her throat tighten. She thought of Lucas, her 10-year-old son, who spent most of his evenings scrolling on an iPad, disengaged from her world of boardrooms and quarterly reports. What would it mean if he had a teacher like this? Someone who saw him, challenged him, believed in him. The class ended nearly 3 hours later. Emily slipped back into the hallway shadows as David carried a box into another room. Curious, she followed at a distance. What she witnessed next silenced even the cynic in her. A smaller group of children, no older than 10, waited anxiously. Their eyes widened as David opened the box and pulled out laptops refurbished, outdated by corporate standards. But to these kids they were treasure. "These are yours," David said gently, handing each child a machine. "I've set them up with learning software and basic tools. Remember, the password is your birthday. Keep practicing. Build something new. Surprise me." One boy hugged the laptop so tightly Emily thought it might crack. His mother, standing behind him, wiped tears with the back of her hand. Emily pressed a palm to her chest. She had spent millions in marketing campaigns to convince the world that NorthStar was changing lives. Yet here, in this peeling walled room, a janitor was doing it with no budget, no shareholders, no press releases. She might have left then, overwhelmed, but fate didn't allow it. "Miss?" Emily spun. A woman stood behind her, late 50s perhaps, wearing an apron dusted with flour. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Are you lost?" Emily swallowed, forcing a smile. "No, I was just..." She scrambled for words, dropping off donations. The woman tilted her head, unconvinced, but before she could reply, David stepped into the hallway. His eyes widened when he saw Emily. "Miss Carter." His voice was low, careful. Her heart thundered. She had been caught. "I was curious," she admitted, her words tumbling too quickly. "I thought." David's expression shifted, not angry, but guarded. He nodded slowly. "The center always appreciates support, especially from someone like you." His tone carried a weight she couldn't decipher. Respect, distrust, both, if you'd like. "I could show you round properly next time," he added, though his eyes said he doubted she'd ever return. "We teach coding, digital literacy, resume building, basic tools that give these kids a chance to break cycles that trap their families." Emily nodded stiffly, throat dry. "Of course, that's commendable. Good night, Miss Carter." And with that, he walked past her, disappearing into the night with the same quiet dignity he carried at NorthStar. Emily lingered long after, her thoughts a storm. Back at her condo overlooking Lake Ontario, she poured herself a glass of wine and opened her laptop. She typed his name, David Ross, into every search bar she could access. Nothing of note. Employment history spotty, records thin. Frustrated, she tried another approach. Middle name, variations? And then she found it, not David. Daniel Ross. Her breath caught as archived articles filled her screen. Headlines about a brilliant systems architect who had once worked for a Vancouver software firm. Patents bearing his name. Photographs of a younger man, sharper jaw, standing proudly beside a team of engineers. But then the trail darkened. A lawsuit, wrongful termination. A whistleblower claim against his CEO for cutting corners on medical software. That could have endangered patients. He had won a modest settlement, but the industry had slammed its doors. Blacklisted. Shortly after, tragedy struck again. His wife's obituary, dated 5 years prior, cancer. Survived by her husband Daniel Ross and their young daughter Sophie. Emily sat frozen. Wine forgotten, the city lights winking through her window. Her janitor wasn't just a teacher. He was once a star in her very industry until principles had cost him everything. And now he was sweeping her floors. The next morning, Emily Carter arrived at NorthStar's headquarters before dawn. The towers of downtown Toronto still shimmered with the last traces of night. As she sank into her chair, eyes bloodshot from hours of scrolling through archives and court records, her janitor was no ordinary janitor. Daniel Ross, former senior systems architect, once considered a rising star in Canadian tech. His patents, some of them eerily similar to the core framework NorthStar, now used in its flagship medical products, were stamped across academic journals and industry reports. And then, a sudden vanishing act. Emily's fingers drummed against the desk. She pulled up the scanned lawsuit, her stomach tightening with each line. Ross v. Harrington, 2018. The claim was simple but damning. Daniel Ross had blown the whistle on his CEO, William Harrington, who had pushed unsafe shortcuts into medical diagnostic software. If released, those flaws could have endangered patients' real lives. Ross refused to stay silent. He was fired within weeks. He sued. He won. But the settlement was meager, and Harrington, a man with friends in every corner of Bay Street, made sure Ross's name was blacklisted. And then, tragedy on top of injustice. His wife's obituary, cancer. A 9-year-old daughter left behind. Emily leaned back, pinching the bridge of her nose. No wonder he vanished. No wonder he wore the mask of invisibility. Principles had cost him his career. Fate had stolen his family. And now, somehow, he had resurfaced here, scrubbing glass walls while teaching coding to children at a community center barely held together with duct tape. Later that day, during a quarterly projection meeting, Emily barely heard a word her executives spoke. Her mind kept drifting back to the grainy footage of Daniel slipping into server rooms at night. Her CFO had interpreted it as theft. But Emily now saw the truth. Those containers weren't stolen prototypes. They were cast-off machines, discarded by developers chasing the next model. Equipment others saw as trash, Daniel transformed into opportunity. Yet her head of security, Marcus Reynolds, wasn't convinced. Emily, we can terminate him quietly, he insisted, dropping a thick file onto her desk. No scandal, no headlines. Just cut him loose before anything leaks. That's the safe call. Emily stared at the file. It was thin, laughably so. 4 years of spotless custodial work reduced to a handful of performance reviews. That's all we know about him, she murmured, and yet he walks through our halls every night. Exactly, Marcus replied. That's the problem. But Emily's instincts rebelled. She couldn't shake the image of Daniel surrounded by kids, his voice calm and commanding as he mapped out code. She couldn't forget the boy hugging a refurbished laptop like a lifeline. Something about this man didn't fit into the neat categories her executives demanded. That evening, she drove back to Scarborough. This time, she didn't lurk in shadows. She walked straight into the community center, the weight of her position hidden beneath her simple clothes. The director, a warm woman named Margaret, greeted her with mild surprise. We don't often see Bay Street types around here, she said, adjusting her glasses. Emily smiled awkwardly. I'm just curious about your program. Margaret's eyes softened. Then you'll want to see Daniel in action. She led Emily down a hall to another room. This wasn't a coding class filled with teenagers. Here, Daniel sat with an elderly woman, gently guiding her through a video call interface. The woman's wrinkled hands trembled as she clicked the mouse. Then suddenly, a face appeared on the screen. Grandchildren in Caracas, Venezuela, waving and crying out with joy. The grandmother's eyes flooded with tears. She hadn't seen their faces in 8 years. Emily's throat closed. She turned away. Overcome. This is what he does, Margaret said softly. He brings people together. He gives them tools they'd never have otherwise. Most people with his kind of mind chase money. He chases meaning. Emily swallowed hard. She had spent her career measuring impact in profit margins and market share. But here, in this peeling walled building, the metrics were different. Smiles, hope, dignity. When she returned to her office, she found her executives in panic. The crisis had arrived. The engineering team had uncovered a flaw in NorthStar's new product, an error in the AI's prediction algorithm. If it went uncorrected, the device could misdiagnose cardiac risks. Launch was 3 weeks away. Investors were circling. Millions hung in the balance. By the time Emily walked into the boardroom, voices were already raised. This will take months to fix, one developer cried. Months we don't have, snapped the CFO. If this leaks, our stock collapses, muttered another. The room buzzed with fear and finger-pointing. Emily's eyes drifted to the glass wall, where a familiar figure was polishing quietly, unnoticed. Daniel. Her chest tightened. She remembered the way his hands had moved across the whiteboard, the confidence in his explanations, the patience in his teaching. For a long moment she hesitated, then made a choice that would stun everyone. Mr. Ross, she called, her voice cutting through the chaos. The room fell silent. Every executive turned, baffled. As the janitor straightened, rag still in hand, would you step in here, please? Daniel froze, his eyes narrowing. He glanced around the table of expensive suits, then reluctantly stepped inside. His faded custodial uniform looked out of place under the glare of boardroom lights. Emily met his gaze. We have a problem, a serious one. I wonder if you might have insights. Whispers rippled across the room. The CFO's face reddened. Emily, this is absurd. Quiet, Emily snapped. I trust my instincts. Let him look. She turned her monitor toward Daniel, displaying the error logs. His expression shifted. The janitor fell away, replaced by something sharper, stronger. His posture straightened. His eyes lit with focus. May I? He asked, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Emily nodded. For 10 tense minutes. The only sound was the clatter of keys. Finally, Daniel leaned back. His voice was steady. It's fixable, but I'll need access to the full code base. The room erupted again. Unthinkable. Liability. He's not cleared. Emily raised her hand. Silence returned. Ladies and gentlemen, she said firmly. This man was senior systems architect on the very framework we built this product on. He has identified our problem when none of us could. For the next 48 hours, he'll be consulting directly with our development team. That's final. The executives sat stunned. Daniel's eyes flickered, unreadable. And in that moment, Emily Carter knew the course of her company and her life had just shifted forever. For 48 hours, the glass towers of NorthStar Innovations never slept. Emily Carter walked the halls at 3 a.m., coffee in hand, as exhausted developers hunched over glowing screens. Yet amid the chaos, there was one figure who seemed unshaken. Daniel Ross. He no longer carried a mop or a spray bottle. Instead, he stood before whiteboards filled with code flow diagrams, his marker squeaking as he rewrote entire systems from memory. Young engineers crowded around him, listening intently as he explained, patient yet precise. This line here, he said, tapping the board, is where your prediction loop is breaking down. You're feeding incomplete data. The algorithm isn't wrong, it's starving. The room, once filled with finger-pointing and panic, had fallen into a rhythm. Daniel's rhythm. Emily watched from the corner, heart pounding with a mix of awe and disbelief. Less than a week ago, this man was invisible, just another uniform in the halls. Now, he was the only thing standing between her company and ruin. By the second night, The pressure reached a fever pitch. A leak to the press had already sparked rumors. NorthStar's upcoming product was flawed. Investors were nervous, and competitors were circling like wolves. The board demanded answers. Emily, her CFO, hissed, cornering her outside the boardroom. "You're gambling the future of this company on a janitor. Do you understand how insane that sounds?" Emily met his glare without flinching. "He's not a janitor. He's the architect of the very system we're standing on. And right now, he's the only one who knows how to save it." The CFO shook his head in disbelief, but Emily turned on her heel before he could argue further. She had already made her choice. The breakthrough came at dawn on the third day. Daniel leaned back from his terminal, shadows carved deep under his eyes. "Run it again," he said. The engineers launched the test. For a breathless moment, everyone held still, eyes fixed on the screen as the algorithm processed its sample. Data, 1 second, 2, 3, then the result, a flawless prediction curve. The room erupted in cheers. Someone clapped Daniel on the back. A young developer actually wiped tears from his eyes. Emily felt her knees weaken with relief. She sank into a chair, whispering a single word under her breath. "Saved." News traveled fast. By the time the Toronto Stock Exchange closed that afternoon, NorthStar's shares had jumped 12%. Analysts praised the company's resilience. Rumors of collapse evaporated. But Emily knew the truth. Their survival had hinged not on polished executives or Ivy League consultants, but on the quiet janitor no one had bothered to see. 2 days later, Emily called an all-hands meeting. The atrium filled with employees from every floor, developers in hoodies, marketers in crisp suits, custodians in faded uniforms. Daniel lingered at the back, still in his janitor's attire, as if unwilling to believe he belonged anywhere else. Emily stepped onto the platform, microphone in hand. Her voice carried across the room. "NorthStar faced disaster this week," she began. "But we survived not because of titles or positions, but because of insight, integrity, and courage." She gestured toward the back. "Daniel Ross, will you join me?" Every head turned. Murmurs rippled as Daniel froze. Emily gave him a small nod. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he walked forward. The crowd parted as he approached the stage. Emily extended her hand. "On behalf of NorthStar, I owe you both apology and opportunity. We would be honored to have you rejoin our technical leadership team, effective immediately." The atrium erupted in applause. Employees cheered, some whistled, others pounded their fists against railings. But Daniel didn't take her hand. His expression remained neutral, his eyes sharp with something Emily couldn't yet name. "That's very generous," he said at last, his voice steady, "but I'm afraid I must decline." The cheers faltered. Silence swept the room. Emily blinked, caught off guard. She had expected humility, perhaps tears of gratitude. "Not this decline," she repeated softly. Daniel straightened, his voice carrying clear. 5 years ago, I lost faith in corporations. I lost my career for standing up for what was right. When the industry turned its back, I learned that true impact doesn't come from boardrooms. It comes from communities. He gestured toward the employees gathered before him. "I don't want to sit in an executive chair. I want to keep building programs that give children in Scarborough and places like it a future in technology. If NorthStar truly values what I've done, then partner with us. Invest in the community center. Provide equipment, curriculum, and internships. That's where your future lies, not just in profit, but in people." The silence broke into something new, murmurs of admiration. Heads nodded. Even some executives looked moved. Emily felt her throat tighten. She turned to the crowd, her decision forming as if it had been waiting all along. "Then that's what we'll do," she declared. "Starting today, Scarborough Community Resource Center becomes NorthStar's flagship partner. We will provide resources, mentorship, and pathways from these classrooms to ours." She faced Daniel again. "And we'll need someone to lead it. Daniel Ross, I am offering you the position of Director of Community Technology Outreach. Will you accept?" For the first time since she had met him, Daniel smiled. Not a guarded smirk, not a polite nod, but a genuine smile that softened the lines etched by years of hardship. This he said. "Taking her hand at last is an offer I'd be honored to accept." The atrium erupted again, louder this time, filled with something deeper than relief. It was hope. And as Emily met Daniel's eyes, she realized this wasn't just about saving a company. It was about second chances. The applause still echoed in Emily Carter's ears long after the atrium had emptied. She stood by the glass wall of her office, staring out at the Toronto skyline, the CN Tower cutting through the night like a sentinel. For years, she had measured her success by profit margins and market share. Tonight, she had witnessed something different, a company cheering not for quarterly gains, but for justice, dignity, and hope. And at the center of it all was Daniel Ross. In the weeks that followed, NorthStar's partnership with the Scarborough Community Resource Center blossomed. What had once been a faded building with flickering lights and duct-taped furniture now hummed with new life. Truckloads of refurbished computers and updated servers arrived. Engineers volunteered as mentors. Executives who had never stepped outside the comfort of Bay Street now spent evenings in Scarborough, teaching workshops on cybersecurity and digital literacy. The walls, once stained with water leaks, were painted bright colors by the very students who learned coding inside. The sign at the entrance was replaced with new lettering, carved proudly into wood: Scarborough Technology and Community Development Center, built for second chances. Emily attended the unveiling ceremony herself. Families crowded the lot, children clutched laptops, and community leaders gave speeches. But when Daniel stepped up to the microphone, the cheers were deafening. "This isn't just a program," he told them, his voice steady. "It's proof that talent exists everywhere, even in places the world forgets to look. NorthStar chose to see it, and now, together, we're building futures." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat as she clapped along with the crowd. This was no press release, no marketing spin. It was real. Yet, amid the celebrations, there was something more subtle happening. A quiet bond was forming between her and Daniel, two single parents, both scarred by betrayal and loss, yet both stubbornly unwilling to give up on the idea of purpose. It started with small things. Daniel would stop by her office after meetings, offering quiet observations about Lucas, her son. "He has an eye for spatial reasoning," he noted once after a STEM activity. "Don't be surprised if he grows up seeing patterns others miss." Emily, in turn, found herself lingering after classes at the center, watching Daniel guide children with patience she had never mastered even in the boardroom. His daughter Sophie and her son Lucas became fast friends, racing each other on coding challenges, arguing about video game logic, laughing until their voices echoed down the halls. For Emily, who had built walls around her heart after her divorce, it was unsettling. For Daniel, who had learned to keep his head down after the industry exiled him, it was unfamiliar. But slowly those walls began to crack. 6 months later, the transformation was undeniable. The first cohort of students from Scarborough graduated into NorthStar internships. Young faces once resigned to limited futures now walked through the glass towers of downtown Toronto, wearing ID badges with pride. Some of them even stood on stage beside Daniel as Emily delivered her quarterly address. "When I became CEO," Emily told the packed atrium, "I believed success was measured in numbers. But Daniel Ross reminded us that true success is measured in lives changed. Technology should serve humanity, not the other way around." The crowd erupted in applause. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, never fully at ease with praise. But when a group of students presented him with a handmade plaque that read, "For the man who saw what we could become before we did," his composure cracked. For a moment, he looked down, blinking hard, then allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Later that evening, after the speeches and the applause, Emily found him standing outside, leaning against his battered Civic. The night air was crisp, the lights of the city glowing in the distance. "You didn't have to cover for me," he said quietly, watching her. "Back when you caught me at the center, you could have fired me on the spot." Emily tilted her head. "Something didn't fit. The way you carried yourself, the way you worked. I needed to understand before I judged." A faint smile touched his lips. "Most people find judgment more convenient than understanding." "I've been judged too," she admitted softly, more than I care to remember." Their eyes held for a long moment, to guarded souls recognizing something familiar in each other. Weeks later, their bond deepened not in the boardroom, but in the simplest of places, at the community center. Emily watched Daniel kneel beside a young boy struggling with a coding problem. He gave the same patient attention he had once given to debugging a $1,000,000 algorithm, never distinguishing between the stakes. And in that moment, Emily realized this was what leadership looked like. Not intimidation, not profit, but care. When Lucas tugged at her hand, excited to show her his project, Emily felt something loosen in her chest, a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying. One evening, as families filtered out of the center, Daniel paused beneath the new wooden sign. He ran his fingers over the carved words, "Built for second chances." "Your idea?" he asked, glancing at Emily. "Some concepts deserve recognition." She replied with a small smile. Their children, Lucas and Sophie, ran ahead to the parking lot. Laughing, Emily and Daniel lingered, the night stretching around them. "Technology access is still the greatest predictor of opportunity," Daniel said. "What we've built here, it's only the beginning." Emily nodded. "Then let's multiply it. Not just in Scarborough, across Canada, across the world." He studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I'll consider it, if you'll consider something in return." She raised a brow. "Which is?" "Joining us for the wilderness STEM camping trip next month. Parents learn survival tech. Kids build environmental monitors. It's chaotic, exhausting, and life-changing." Emily laughed, genuinely, for the first time in a long while. "I'll think about it." As they walked toward their cars, her sleek luxury sedan, his weathered Civic, Daniel paused. "Emily," he called softly. She turned, catching the quiet certainty in his eyes. "Some of the parents are organizing a community dinner next weekend. Nothing formal, just food, laughter, people who care. You and Lucas would be welcome." The invitation hung in the air between them, professional collaboration edging toward something more personal. Emily smiled. "We'd like that." And for the first time, she didn't feel like a CEO balancing numbers or a mother protecting her heart. She felt like a woman being given her own second chance. The story of NorthStar wasn't finished. Neither was theirs. But as the last light of day caught the wooden sign, shining over a center reborn from struggle and resilience, Emily Carter knew this much. Sometimes the greatest innovations weren't built in glass towers. They were built in the quiet determination of second chances.